You're listening to Seminary Dropout, and I'm your host, Shane Blackshear. Somewhere in between seminary and youth camp, it's Seminary Dropout. Let's go. Michele, thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Shane. Thanks for having me.
I want to start out by telling a story. And just for those out there, that's generally a bad interview technique for interviewers to start. Right?
Oh, why not? Let's just go for it.
Why not? There's a purpose for it, I promise. So several years back, I went and I got a tattoo. And I went to this place here in Austin on 6th Street to get it. And 6th Street's kind of the, where wild times happen. Tourists come and drink a lot and that kind of thing. So I go and I get the tattoo and my wife is there with me. And I just, because of the sensation of it, because of the pain, I get physically ill. And toward the end of it, actually 2 different times during it, I have to run to the bathroom and throw up twice. So the second time...
Is this a big tattoo?
No, it's embarrassingly small, actually.
Well, bravo for being brave enough to share it.
So the last time I go to the bathroom and throw up, and I am just in cold sweats, just covered in sweat, and kind of just lean against the wall and kind of sink to the floor. And when I feel the floor with my hand, I feel that it's cool to the touch. And I thought, it'd be really nice to put my face on this floor right now.
No.
And so I did. And as I was laying there, I was thinking, I feel like I've played by all the rules in life. I graduated high school and then I went to college and I know I never did drugs. I never even smoked a cigarette, and then after college, I got a job and I got married, I played by the rules. And yet I still wound up face first on a bathroom floor of a tattoo parlor. And it occurs to me that that's kind of like what your book is about when I was reading, that you're a person who really played by all the rules. I mean, you took care of yourself and your body and it still wound up with cancer diagnosis. You, from a very early age, prayed for God to bring you a good husband. And yet divorce is part of your story.
Exactly.
And so it just occurs to me that part of your story, the meta narrative, is that we can play by the rules and yet life still happens.
Exactly. Yeah, from a very early age, I somehow had gotten caught up into this idea that faith was like a math equation. 2 + 2 should equal 4. So if you follow the 10 Commandments, if you read your Bible and pray every day, if you go to church on Sunday, then for some reason, God then was obligated or should, or maybe in my mind, I thought he had somewhere along the way promised that if I did all the right things, I'd have a good life. And so then when I found myself at the age of 27 going through a divorce from a pastor, I didn't know what to do with that. That kind of math doesn't add up. And then when I found myself in my early 30s with a blended family that was very complicated and hard and difficult, I didn't know what to do with that. And then when I ended up with teenagers who didn't make the right choices and didn't follow what we had taught them about faith and didn't always do what we wanted them to do, I'm like, hold on, I've been praying for these kids forever. That doesn't make any sense. Why would that happen? And then like the big finale or big whammy was when I was 39 years old and got a phone call from the doctor saying that I had a very rare kind of cancer. I had never been a smoker. I had never been someone who was like a heavy drinker or anything. So how did a 39-year-old mom who exercised, who ran 6 days a week and ate healthy food, how did she end up with cancer of the tongue while being a speaker and a coach of speakers? It made no sense. So here I am, 39 years old, and all my math equations about who God should be and what he should do and how he should respond did not add up. And so it basically took me to with my face on the bathroom floor, just like you, saying, all right, I got to start square one all over again. How does this happen? And what does this mean about God? And what am I going to do with that? I mean, what am I going to do with a God that doesn't behave the way that I anticipate?
To me, it was also really reminiscent of Solomon saying, Meaningless, meaningless, everything is meaningless. I mean, that, because,
You are reading my mind. I can't tell you how many times I've quoted Ecclesiastes.
yeah, exactly. And that comes right after Proverbs, which is like a bunch of lists of like, here's some things to do to have a good life. And it's like
Exactly.
Solomon is saying, yeah, I mean, that's good stuff to do. But in the end, you might wind up, somewhere else.
Kind of makes you want to know his story, right? You
Oh,
kind of picture that he might have gotten a tattoo and thrown up on the bathroom floor. Because somewhere between Proverbs and Song of Solomon, or somewhere between Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, he's gone through something that makes him question his purpose and the richness and the meaning of life, where he's not even sure there's really any meaning here. And that tells me there's something hard that he faced that didn't make any sense.
Well, your life changed by orders of magnitude over the span of about 8 months. That
Yes.
was when you got the cancer diagnosis that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
You also had 3 new children, young children under your care all of a sudden at that.
Added, yes. So the first cancer diagnosis came in November of 2010. And that's when I was a 39-year-old mom of 3 teenage boys. And then, fast forward 8 months. In those 8 months, by the way, I was going through, I think I went through something like 5, 6, 7 different procedures on my mouth. I was still traveling and speaking in between recovering. I was dealing with the expected panic and fear about the fact that I now am living with a cancer diagnosis, and what does that mean, and how long am I going to be here? And at the same time, my second son graduated from high school. So my husband and I are in the process of transitioning to empty nest. So we have 2 of our 3 boys out of high school, a third one getting ready to drive. And after all we had been through with cancer and teenagers and everything else, let me tell you that empty nest was something we like to call the promised land. It looked pretty darn sweet. We were looking forward to it. But 2 months to the day after my second son graduated from high school, and 8 months after the cancer diagnosis, we got a phone call from someone telling us about a mom who had 3 children she could no longer care for. Because of her own life choices and some addictions that she struggled with, she could no longer be a mother to her twin 4-year-olds and a 5-year-old, 2 girls and a boy. And so the question was asked to my husband and I, will you take them? As if we needed any more complication in our life,
Yeah,
right?
you didn't have anything else going on.
And I'm sitting there going, my first response is, really? Don't you think you've asked enough of us, God? I mean, really? You're going to ask us to do this? I'm only 8 months out of cancer. I have no idea if it's going to come back. Parenting has been hard. All of it. You really think this is a good idea to drop 3 more kids in our life? I don't think so. And yet at the same time, I remembered a lifetime of promises to God where I would say, God, I will go anywhere for you. I would do anything for you, to the point that my husband and I had planned that when our boys had graduated, that we would, sell everything and maybe go on the mission field. We thought, this is what we were really passionate about. We had such a heart for serving people that were in poverty-torn areas. And so we had planned to move that direction as our kids had graduated. And then we get this call about these 3 kids, and both my husband and I really felt that God was saying this to us. Michele, you have promised to go anywhere and do anything for me. You've always said that you would do it all, that you would sell everything and go on the mission field for me. I'm not asking you to go, I'm asking you to stay. Are you still game? Let's just be honest. It's a whole lot easier to, go for a few weeks of the year on a mission trip than to raise 3 children from a broken background all over again. I mean, it's like, okay, God, send me to Africa, because that's a whole heck of a lot easier than raising kids. Don't make me do this.
Right.
And yeah, I had to decide in that moment, do I really mean what I had always said I meant in my faith walk with God? I mean, it's one thing to claim these things on Sunday morning or in our quiet time. It's another thing when the phone rings.
Yeah.
And so I had to really decide if I was just all talk or if I really meant what I said. And somewhere in the course of this whole cancer journey, I had come face to face with my own brokenness, my own desperation for God, my own need for a healing God to come in and reassure me that even though life didn't make sense, he was still worthy of being trusted, that I could be safe with him, even if life was unexpected. And it hit me that that's exactly what these kids need. So the
Mm.
very thing that I had been through was actually the training ground for hopefully delivering and communicating that to three very broken children who needed to know the same thing. And so 24 hours after that phone call, we packed up a car with borrowed car seats because we didn't have a car seat
You,
anymore.
you didn't have your teenagers' car seats in the garage
No,
somewhere.
no booster seats for the teenagers. And we drove and we picked up twin 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds and started parenting all over again.
Part of that craziness is like, I can't relate to that much. My wife and I have a 21-month-old who's just starting to like sporadically sleep through the night. And my wife is ready to have another one sooner than I am. And I'm kind of like, can we just like maybe sleep for the next couple of years and then talk about it?
You
Like,
don't remember what it's like to sleep for more than a few hours at a time, a couple hours at a time.
yeah, exactly. When I can imagine if you've got, older teenagers, like you're kind of, getting them out the door at that point.
Oh,
And
my
hey,
friend,
how about you start over?
I haven't slept in 20 some years, so I don't even remember.
Well, and now you've got, another 14 to go. You added
Exactly.
on.
I mean, it was like running a marathon and getting to that last mile and somebody saying, okay, good job, but I want you to go back and run the whole thing again.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, and so, people like to look at fostering and adopting, especially in our current church culture. I mean, this is important. We like to look at and glamorize it. And the Bible is very clear about what we do with widows and orphans, but we don't need to glamorize it. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes God calls us to hard things. And just because it's hard doesn't mean we're not called to it. And just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not good. But let's be very careful that we don't turn our obedience to God into some kind of Hollywood performance. It's not what it's about. I mean, this is a reality that we live out every day that is, it's good and it's right. And I would do it again, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's obedience.
And I think that those who have kids know that the whatever glamour is a part of it outwardly will quickly like fade away and not be worth it at 4 o'clock in the morning if you're doing it for those reasons.
And parenting's hard no matter how you slice it. But when you add the added dynamics of a traumatic background
Yeah.
and things that happened in the early years that no child should have to go through, it just makes the whole process that much more complicated. But at the end of the day, aren't we all somewhat broken? Don't we all come to God with pieces that don't fit together and things that don't work? And so somehow through this process of raising children that come from hard places, it also has taught me more about the grace of God and the necessity of a healing God for all of us.
I want to quote from your book. One of the things you said was, cancer, as heinous and evil as it was, had delivered an unexpected gift. It taught us how to live, not in regret over all the ways we wish we could go back and do it over, not in mourning the countless unfinished, undone places that yet remained, and not in fear of the unknown future we couldn't predict or control. Cancer, in both its presence and absence, had taught me the immeasurable value of today.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people who haven't had this experience can, and this is sound weird, but I think we'll know what I'm talking about. People who haven't gone through this experience will kind of romanticize something as awful as a cancer diagnosis or a terminal diagnosis. Tim McGraw sings a song about how awesome it would be to get a terminal diagnosis.
Which, just makes me laugh because it's not awesome.
Right. And so, you're talking about the thing that, cancer taught you the immeasurable value. And so it seems like if someone who's gone through it finds a silver lining or some kind of reward for having gone through that kind of experience, that is a really hard fought battle to get to that point.
Oh, you said that very well. That was so insightful, Shane. It is that quote that I wrote, I still believe and I stand behind it 100%, but that coming to that place required years of struggle to get to the place where I could say that and see it. And there are days that it's still a struggle. It's not like I've arrived at this place of absolute confidence and peace and I never waver from that. I mean, it's still a struggle. I believe it 100%, but it took so many dark nights of wrestling for me to get to that place. There's a verse in the Bible that talks about him giving us secrets in the darkness, treasures stored in the hidden places. I mean, that's really what ends up happening is You come to these conclusions in these places where you get a little bit of a revelation about the truth of God in the heart, but it's found in the darkness. I mean, it's found in the hard,
Mm.
hard, hard places. These are not things that are achieved lightly. I have thought so much of the Apostle Paul over the last several months and how he could come to a place where he says, to live is Christ, to die is gain. I mean, we quote that so easily, but when you're facing a possible terminal situation, can you really say that?
Mm.
I mean, that's not something you say flippantly. It can't be, not when you're faced with the reality of it. Paul's saying that he delights in weaknesses and hardships because when he is weak, then he is strong. There is, I know for a fact, just after my story, there is so much wrestling and hardship that led to him being able to say that. And same with his verses about, he says, I so much long to depart and go and be with the Lord, which is better by far. And yet I know that I need to remain and be here with you. And he talks about this tension between longing to go to heaven and yet knowing that there's still more to do here and living with him, his feet straddling heaven and earth. Let me tell you, that does not come easily. Coming to
Mm.
that kind of place and position does not come easily. That was hard earned for him as well. And that's one thing I've discovered as we go through this. The only way we really make peace with the imperfect life is by allowing ourselves to wrestle in these very hard, dark places.
That's so insightful because I think that we kind of romanticize Paul's words about, the heaven would be so much better. But I think even for Christians, like, we have to get to a pretty dark place before we say, like, I'm ready to check out now. You know what I mean? Even with the hope that we have.
Agreed. I've seen people that are in horrible suffering for years that still cling to this life and they have a great faith. I'm not demeaning their faith, but there's something about our flesh, our humanity that clings to this life, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, God gave us the gift of life, so he wanted us to enjoy it. John 10:10, I've come to give you life and that more abundantly. There's nothing wrong with enjoying this life. What we have to somehow do is learn to live in the tension of savoring the gift of life that God has given us without losing sight of the eternity that's really the ultimate destination. And that's a very hard tension for the average person to wrestle with. And most of us don't allow ourselves to sit in that tension until we achieve some kind of face-to-face with our own mortality.
I'm curious if during the whole process, from the times when you're most scared and even coming out of that, if you were surprised at how the presence of God in your life felt, and if there were some times where you didn't feel like you felt the presence of God.
Yeah, both. So I've, fast forward from 2010, I've had cancer diagnosis a total of 3 times now. It came back for a second time in March 2014, which included a major surgery and 8 weeks of recovery and all kinds of difficulty. And then it came back a third time just 7 months ago. And since 7 months ago, so November 2010, I've gone through 3 more hospital stays. I think 3 more. I lost count. 2 more hospital stays, another surgery, and 28 radiation treatments, internal radiation, and then chemotherapy as well. So I'm only about 4 months out of treatment right now, which means I'm only about 50%. Okay, so all of that gives you the background. I would say last March, when I got the second diagnosis, I experienced the presence and reality of God in a beautiful and profound way. In fact, I had no fear. I had such a sense of peace and confidence and assurance in that place. I did not feel fear. And it was a beautiful thing. And then when it came back a third time, I had just the opposite experience, where this time I was going through significant physical suffering, pain. I mean, we're talking about 7 months of unending physical suffering. And that took me to a whole different place of darkness and struggle that I have never walked through in my faith walk to date until now. And God seemed strangely silent. I couldn't feel him. We want to feel God. We want to feel warm fuzzies and all that. And there were many days where I didn't feel anything but my own pain and my own suffering. So what do you do in those kind of places? And I found that in those moments, I had to decide if I believed what the Bible says or not. I mean, it really boiled down to, do I really take the Bible at its word? Do I really believe what I've always claimed? And if I do, it's not like I can believe half or not. I mean, either God is telling the truth or he's not. And do I really believe it or not? And boy, I had to spend a number of months, and still do at times, wrestling with a faith that I had grown up with and always believed, and really coming to terms with, do I really believe the Bible is accurate and true, and that God is a person of his word, and that when he says he's with me, even if I don't feel him, he is with me, and I'm banking on it.
And you tell me, but my opinion is that in those times where it was hard and you did have fear and pain and all those things, that doesn't speak to the condition of your faith at that time.
No, in fact, I would say almost the opposite. In fact, this is what's so profound or miraculous about all of this. I had grown up most of my life in a Christian home, and so I've known Jesus and had a faith since I was a very, very young girl. I don't ever remember not believing in God. But somewhere along the way, I had become terrified of my own doubts, as if doubts and struggle would somehow lead me down a road where I'd end up with no faith at all. But what I've come to discover over the last 7 months is doubts were actually the necessary struggle to create a faith that I had been praying for my whole life.
Mm.
Doubts were actually the road that I needed to walk down and wrestle with and struggle with in order to create a faith that was strong enough to withstand any kind of tragedy. This was not hard earned. In fact, I'm still very much in progress, as we all are. But my doubts do not threaten the reality of God in any way. My doubts don't pose any kind of threat to the truth. And whereas before I was so afraid of my doubts, now I realize that I'm very safe in exploring them and wrestling with them, as long as I'm moving through them, because the reality of God and the truth of God will stand the test of time and will stand in spite of my struggle. And on the other side of that, my faith will be something that I've always wanted and hoped for it to be, much stronger, much more sure, much more grounded in truth than it ever was before.
I'm curious if you found just the physical pain and the toll that it took on you to affect you psychologically.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I was just going to say, the reason I have an intuition about that, because I tell you, when I get the flu after the third day, I'm like, oh God, why would you ever let me suffer like this? Like,
you're like, take me home now. Just
how can this be possible? A part of your plan?
It is so true. I had never had a true empathy for physical suffering that I have now. I mean, I have never fully understood. None of us can really understand physical pain and suffering until you've experienced it. And the physical pain and suffering that I have experienced over the last 7 months there's really no words to describe it. It was completely debilitating emotionally, physically, spiritually. It broke me to a point where there were so many days that all I could do was just lay there and weep and just struggle. And it really fights you for the will to live. I mean, where you just aren't even sure it's worth fighting through some things that for somebody like me who's I tend to be pretty tenacious and determined, and nothing's going to get me down. And all it took was 7 months of physical pain and suffering for me to be ready to throw in the towel. And so that gives you an idea of how it's brutal and it's heinous. And I have a new compassion for those who are in a place of physical pain.
I just wonder if that divorce being part of your background has made you more empathetic for those who've had life happen to them. Because I think what I said was, even a lot of us who we don't consider ourselves judgmental people, we still kind of think like, yeah, but that wouldn't happen to me in my circumstance. Maybe not just divorce, but anything.
Anything. Yeah. Anything. I was that person, going back to early, somehow in my faith, I had turned my faith into an equation. So you have to do 2 + 2 to get 4. You have to do it right. So if you end up with 5, that means somewhere you did something wrong to get 5. That's what I probably would have denied it if you told me that in those kind of words, but that's really how I was operating. So I was very legalistic. I was very judgmental of those people who ended up in less than ideal scenarios, because clearly they had taken a misstep along the way. Otherwise, they wouldn't have ended up there. until I ended up there. And
Right.
then I had to force myself to wrestle with the fact that sometimes you can do the right things and still end up with the wrong result. Now, I say that, and I need to preface it with the fact that that doesn't mean I wasn't imperfect in my marriage. I mean, I'm just as human and sinful as the next person. So I certainly wasn't without flaw. But I ended up in a divorce that I never dreamed of or imagined or hoped for or anything. So what do you do there? Well, at first, my response was the fact that, well, clearly my life in ministry is over because God cannot use somebody who is divorced, right? He can forgive every other sin, but not divorce. It's like the worst one. This was back in the 90s, and there was still very much that stigma and mentality that divorce was about the worst thing you could ever do. Until I ended up in South Africa several years later. We went to South Africa for 2 weeks to do a mission trip to the poorest area of all South Africa. It was a squatters camp called Intabazwe. And there's about 60,000 people in this squatters camp. And over the course of 2 weeks, I would go from home to home and spend time with different families. And there was one woman that I spent quite a bit of time with. Her name was Macy. She was a single mom of an 11-year-old son, and she had AIDS and was very ill. And it was very clear she wasn't going to live for long. Being a single mom, her husband had left her for another woman. So here she is in that scenario, raising a single child, very, very sick, dealing with what I would call an unexpected life. And on our last day there, I took her a Bible that was in her own language because I wanted her to be able to have that. And I opened the Bible to Isaiah 61, and I turned my English Bible to Isaiah 61. So we both had our Bibles open to the same chapter and verse. And I started reading Isaiah 61 to her, which talks about how Jesus would come to create beauty from ashes and gladness from mourning and a garment of praise from a spirit of despair. You will be called oaks of righteousness, a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. And in that moment, as I was reading Isaiah 61 to her, it occurred to me that if I had come to South Africa as a married woman with an intact family and everything perfect and everything going well, I really would have had nothing to offer her. But I came to her as a formerly divorced woman who knew what it was like to be a single mom, who was struggling with a God that she didn't always understand.
Hmm.
And because she knew my story, that became a connection point. And that's why I could read Isaiah 61 to her about a God who brings beauty from ashes, gladness from mourning, and how he would rebuild the ruins and rise us up as an oak of righteousness someday as a planting of the Lord for the display of his splendor. It was only my brokenness and my history as a divorced woman that enabled me to offer her anything at all. And that was such a profound moment for me that here I had worked so hard for half of my life to bring my perfection to the table, as if God needed my perfect little life in order to accomplish his ministry. And he very clearly showed me that it doesn't matter if you're married, divorced, whatever, you still bring nothing to the table.
Hmm.
All you have is my grace and my mercy and the blood of Jesus over you. And that is enough.
Hmm. I'm wondering if coming so close to the realness of death, if it makes you treat yourself better, not just physically, but, things like we beat ourselves up a lot. And I wonder if that experience of you understanding better than before just how valuable you are as a human being has caused you to treat yourself a little bit differently.
Yes, I would say that is absolutely true, except in those moments when the pain and the suffering makes me doubt and question the love of God. And in those moments, I'm like, God, do you really see me? Are you here? And I struggle. But when I work through that, boy, it helps me to be much more gracious, so fragile. I used to always worry about my weight and how big I was and all this. When you're fighting for your life over cancer, you could care less what the scale says.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what size jeans you wear and all of that. I mean, it seems so foolish and silly. So many other things I would worry about and be hard on myself as far as the projects that I'm getting done and how I'm doing with work and all of that. And all of those things kind of just evaporate when you're faced with life and death. And the things that really matter come front and center. Things like making wrongs right, asking forgiveness, offering forgiveness, loving the people that are entrusted to you very, very well, and knowing where you stand in your faith. I mean, That's all that really matters. That it really boils down to just a handful of critical things.
You talked about, I think you've had, is it 4 diagnoses in total?
Three.
3, and the
Three.
last one was after the book was complete, right?
Yeah, the last one was November. So the book came out March 10th. I finished treatment on Valentine's Day, so just 3 weeks before.
Mm.
So the day the book came out, I was, for those who have gone through cancer treatment, they know this, but just because treatment is done doesn't mean you feel better. In fact, it gets progressively worse. So I actually felt worse on the day my book came out than I had in a while. In fact, I slept through the whole day of the book launch.
I think there's something really symbolic there because we think that our story is complete today,
Mm-hmm.
but yet it still goes on and it's unwritten. And there can be fear, but there's also can be a lot of hope and a lot of optimism in that as well.
True. Yeah, there's really two ways to look at that. There are some people that looked at the fact that my book was coming out while I was in the middle of a third diagnosis as God's horrible timing. That clearly he has his schedule messed up. His Google Calendar is off because that makes no sense. Why would a book that's talking about the faithfulness of God, why would it launch while Michele is in the middle of a third diagnosis and treatment? It didn't make any sense. So you can have that kind of view where it's terrifying because it's so unpredictable and it's so awful and the worst can happen and this was just terrible timing. Or you can look at it as the whole book was about the imperfect, unexpected life. And the fact that I'd be in the middle of a third diagnosis when it came out is just a continuation of the same message, the same story, the same lesson. And to me, I look at, and although I don't believe God caused my cancer, I see his hand all over it. I mean, what interesting and beautiful timing that this book would come out in the middle of this while I'm still struggling, because too many times as Christians, we try to wrap up our stories with nice, neat red bows. But our nice, neat red bows don't connect with the person that's still in the struggle. It's really all of us where we are still wrestling, still struggle, where we connect with each other. We become the church that chooses to believe in the faithfulness and love of God, even here.
Well, and, God forbid any of us, die of a terminal illness. But if we do, that doesn't make our story and God's story any less victorious.
Exactly. We talk about so-and-so lost their battle to cancer. We don't lose.
Yeah.
I mean, when God is really authoring the story, and I'm not saying this as a cliche. I mean, I'm living this out every single day. When God is the author of the story, there is no losing. Yes, we have losses, but the ultimate story is still a win for God. And I see this every day in the emails that I receive from people that have read the book and the people that are hearing the story, that somehow in this very heinous, horrible place that I would never wish on anybody, somehow God is still bringing so much incredible good and redemption and grace even here. I see it all the time. I can't deny that. I wish I didn't have to go through this. I wish he would just take it away and everything would be fine. But while I'm here, boy, he's really given me some pretty incredible glimpses of glory right here. I mean, this is what we see this all through the Bible. Excuse me as I get on my little soapbox, all right?
That's why you're here.
All through the Bible. We see it when the Israelites are faced up against the sea. I mean, they've got this vast Red Sea in front of them and the Egyptians behind them. And it looks like God is really screwed up this time. I mean, boy, he's really messed up. And so they can either turn around and return to the Egyptians and go back to slavery. They can try to go the long way around and figure out how to get around the Red Sea, or they can drown. Or they could stand and see the deliverance of God. And that's exactly what Moses says in 14:14. The Lord himself will fight for you. You only need to be still. They stand there, and if they would just go through, they get to see the glory of God. Can you imagine if they would have turned back to the Egyptians, what they would have missed out on? And somehow we have to figure out how, even in these hard places, how to look for the glory here. That glory is at stake. And it may not be the way we want our story to go. And it may not be comfortable. And it may be stinking hard. But glory is at stake. And if we can hang in there and keep our eyes focused on the one who leads us, we get to see a glimpse of something incredible.
It seems like that's the hope of Christ, is that even if it's not going to be okay, after that, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus was in the garden begging God to take the cup from him, right? Please don't make me go through this. What if he would have turned back and not done it? I mean, oh my goodness, that's the ultimate story. That's the whole story arc of the whole entire Bible, is the fact that on the other side of the worst case scenario, there's glory. And thank heavens there is.
Well, Michele, I've had such a great time talking with you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. And the book is so wonderful and fun to read. And it's funny at times. People are going to laugh and they're going to cry. So thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you, Shane. Thanks for asking some tough questions and hanging out in this hard place. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Remember, you can find all the show notes for this show and all shows at shaneblackshear.com. Thanks to those that left ratings and reviews on iTunes this week. Remember, that keeps the show front and center. Also, remember, you can find me on Twitter at @beardonabike. That's @beardonabike. Also, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/ShaneBlackshear123. And remember that Seminary Dropout is listener supported. You can visit supportseminarydropout.com and press Become a Patron. Remember, this music you're listening to right now is by D.L. Rossi. You can find him online on iTunes and at dlrossi.com. All right, thanks again for joining me for another episode of Seminary Dropout. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Love you. Take care.